And what is going on is ethnic stroke religious cleansing. There's not room for their kids and our kids in this country. And this is where the fight back of the British people for our land is really going to start. Places like this.
The leader of the British National Party, Nick Griffin, addresses supporters at a secretly arranged venue in Bradford. The following day, the city will witness the worst rioting in a decade. But the BNP will be gone, their hands apparently clean. It's a pattern that's become familiar.
All we got was immigration in the end. We were campaigning about the race attacks on white people in town. Would you like a leaflet? Yeah. The paper as well?
Yeah.
I'll read some more. OK, there you are. Are you voting in the election?
Here's Nick Griffin across the Pennines in Oldham, 6 weeks earlier. It's the election campaign and he's a BNP candidate, soft-selling a hard message.
You're going to vote Labour again this time? You don't know. You're going to think about voting for someone else?
He's aiming for disgruntled Labour and Tory voters, his own party coming from outside the democratic tradition. Yet only 3 years ago, the smiling Mr Griffin was convicted of inciting racial hatred. Until he was stopped by the courts, the man who claims he's no racist was running a magazine crammed with offensive material.
The symbolism and the images and the graphics that went with it were lifts from National Socialist publications, the decorations in it. It was a clear message, a National Socialist publication. I won't...
You mean Nazi?
National Socialist. You can use whatever word you like.
Over the past couple of years, the BNP's deliberately changed its image. Its aims and purpose are the same as ever, the creation of an all-white Britain, which Nick Griffin calls our priceless genetic heritage. But it's all now wrapped in new packaging. Griffin says it's like marketing, and he chose to test launch this new old product by targeting the town of Oldham. Oldham is enduring hard times. It's a poor area and, like many of the old northern mill towns, there's a large impoverished Asian population, wooed by an industry which then collapsed. Then at the start of this year, the local police chief delivered crime figures which were manna from heaven for a party based on race. He said in the majority of reported race attacks, the victims were white, the culprits Asian. Claims that parts of Oldham were no-go areas for whites, denied by the police, received widespread media coverage in the following weeks. Matters came to a head when an elderly pensioner was beaten by young Asians. Initial reports that the motive was racial now appear wrong. But in a town where many whites and Asians live in poverty but apart, the BNP cashed in.
You go down to Hollingwood, Limeside, you don't need to be a genius to see that this is an area of considerable deprivation. They're all white areas. So the BNP begin to organise in that area, pointing out that nothing, at this stage nothing is being done for these communities, and yet apparently money is being spent in Asian areas. So that cranks up the tension. People are saying, well look, they're getting a cultural centre and we've got houses that are barely fit to live in. Of course, Asian people have that problem as well.
Carefully choosing local issues, the BNP played on fears that Britishness was being eroded. Oldham's civic emblem is the owl. You can see it everywhere, including on traffic bollards in the town centre. When the council decided to spruce up the borough for the North West in Bloom competition, some older bollards were replaced. The new bollards were owl-free. The BNP jumped on this, blitzing the town's white estates with leaflets.
Oldham's owl might offend Muslims, so she's got to go. Our ancient traditions and culture are being airbrushed out of the picture.
This was nonsense on all counts, but the BNP's lie had stuck. There was more mischief on St George's Day, when English flags mysteriously appeared along main roads leading into Asian areas. The council said the flags obscured traffic signs and removed them. It was what the BNP had been waiting for. Again, their leaflets stirred things up.
The council wouldn't even give the English 24 hours in their own town. Whites are second-class citizens. They don't count.
People feel their identity is being challenged, white people, I think, and so anything that feeds on that, is a very profitable source of political activity, and the BNP have mined that very well.
If we look back in history, we'll see that in fact this is a tactic that's been used by fascists in the 1920s, and in fact was very central to fascist thinking, to exploit local issues as a way of recruiting people into the party.
While the BNP's tactic in Oldham was to chase local issues, posing as the local party, their local membership was tiny. Even the handful that met in places like this Conservative club, the club had understood they were a rugby team, were bolstered by outsiders. But with Oldham their target seat, Griffin's entourage was parachuted into the campaign from outside. People like his right-hand man, Tony Lacombe. He served jail sentences for possessing bombs and attacking a Jewish teacher. But in Oldham, Lacombe and his friends were on their best behaviour. So only weeks now before the election, and the BNP's strategy of changing its image was working perfectly. What's remarkable about this apparent transformation is its speed and timing. For Nick Griffin is the man who only a few years earlier had specifically disavowed what he called respectability. He said then the BNP's only road to victory would be marked by well-directed boots and fists. From Colin Jordan to John Tyndall, the far right in Britain has long been saddled with fascist leaders. The donning of uniforms and insignia betrayed them. But there are no photos of Nick Griffin in Nazi clothes, so his appearance is benign. But appearances can be deceptive. Martin Webster, Griffin's one-time bosom pal, is as racist today as he was when he led the National Front 20 years ago. He just doesn't have a party anymore. While he sympathises with the BNP members, he loathes his former acolyte Griffin and his change of image.
He launched himself back into British nationalist politics again with the most extreme branch of the BNP he could find. And it was only after a couple of years that he realised that the hardcore boot boy element, which he used to appeal to, he realised that the boot boys were going to get the heave-ho and that the respectable modernisers were going to be in the ascendancy and get rid of John Tyndall as chairman. But this faction didn't have a leader.
Recently convicted for racial incitement, Griffin changed tack. While he continues to take funds and inspiration from far-right extremists in America, he's remodelled the party along the lines of the French neo-fascist Front National, led by Jean-Marie Le Pen. So he's now dropped compulsory deportations for so-called voluntary repatriation. But Griffin's own blueprint for the BNP shows his plans for a pure white Britain are as hardline as ever.
I want to see Britain becoming the 99% genetically white country she was.
He called it
bridging the gulf between what we ideally want to do and what the British people will let us do.
He noted that after 10 or 12 years of departures, a BNP government could ask the public to force out those few non-whites who remained. Anyway, he wrote,
why would any even want to stay in a country which manifestly didn't want them?
What he's learned is to be a clever racist. He's learned to speak in a code. So instead of using the old racist language of blacks are inferior, blacks are oversexed, there's a Jewish conspiracy, he's learned to speak in a language which is more acceptable.
The culture and tradition Nick Griffin and the BNP promote can be found at their red, white and blue weekend camp. Last year they claimed it staged the rebirth of British nationalism.
Everyone who was there will have their own memories. The sight of so many white children playing together, the torchlit procession, the dry ice smoke swirling around top white pride vocalist Stigger as he entertained the crowd.
This all-white fun helped lose the party several £1,000s. By the end of last year, Nick Griffin was facing an internal rebellion, questioning his management and leadership. Then Oldham came along to save him. From early March, the BNP were just one of the far-right groups active in Oldham. Aided by football hooligans, the National Front either made or threatened weekly visits to the town. Each time, tension grew. The National Front is these days only a racist rump, called morons by their former member, Nick Griffin. But as the NF's website points out, Griffin's party were given crucial help by the National Front.
Many of his members are either ex-NF members or hold joint memberships.
Said NFHQ, and then, addressing Griffin directly,
we stood aside in your Oldham seat so as not to look like splitting the nationalist vote.
It seems that it suits the BNP particularly well if they can appear as the sort of more moderate and self-respecting face of racism, whereas the NF are the hard, unpleasant guys. The NF crank up the atmosphere and the BNP reap the racist vote.
That reaping was going on when Nick Griffin was filmed canvassing in Oldham 12 days before the election. In these few hours, Oldham's months of tension bore its bitter fruit. There was Griffin with his soft sell, while the National Front were out provoking young Asians who, in turn, were ready to retaliate. By evening, Oldham was alight.
British National Party, 6552.
Come election day, the BNP enjoyed its best results in 3 northwestern constituencies. In Oldham West, Nick Griffin got over 16%. In Oldham East, Mick Treacy polled 11%. Speeches were banned, so both candidates wore gags to the count, another gimmick borrowed from France and Le Pen. The third northwest constituency where the BNP saved its deposit was Burnley, where they polled 11.5%. Again, the BNP organisers, and there were a lot, about 40 of them here in Burnley, worked on the new image, playing hard on local grievances and any racial tensions. The difference was the Volden for the election. The disturbances, the spark was an attack on an Asian taxi driver, continued for several days. In the middle of this riotous weekend, who pitched up but the BNP's Mr. Griffin, in his words, to give white people a political voice. We went back to Burnley last week to the heritage shop run by the BNP's Steve Smith. Mr. Smith is word perfect on Griffin's new party line.
We have civil unrest in this country at present, and we don't...
Aren't you playing a part in creating that?
No, not at all. We don't consider it a moral position to continue along the lines that we're presently on, which is causing a lot of pain, unhappiness and misery for quite a lot of people.
Do you not accept responsibility for that?
Absolutely not. We blame the politicians who have forced this situation upon us. Enforced multiracialism is the cause of this unrest.
So the BNP maintain they've no role in the riots, yet use them to show the wisdom of their repatriation policy. It's a neat trick they've been playing all summer, right across the north of England and beyond. They're not going to stop now.
They don't want to have the image of skinhead boot boys. They want their people to dress up in suit ties and to go around with clipboards. But I think that they're giving people the impression that they're changing policy, where I just don't believe that they are doing that. They are simply putting different packaging on it.
Its main policy plank, the voluntary, so-called voluntary repatriation of non-whites from Britain, is bound to encourage racial disharmony.
It's an ill wind which Nick Griffin and the apparent BNP National Front double act have both fanned and exploited to the full. Griffin and his new image party feel they're on a roll, heading for seats in next year's council elections. And if there's the odd spot of violence on the way, they'll keep clean, white hands to count the votes.